Hello and welcome all. For today's session, we'll start the session with a recap quiz for databases that we have covered in our last session. Please do join the Kahoot. The game pin is displayed on the screen as well as I have pasted it on the chat. So good, we have 6 participants. So let us start the game. So you have 90 seconds to answer. Okay, so 3 of you got the answer correct, which is right, Amazon Elastic Cache for Redis. Yeah, as the question talks about in-memory database, it has to be elastic cache. Amazon RDS is actually a physical database, not an in-memory database, so it is either B or D. Between Redis and Memcached, why it is Redis? Because of providing high availability using data replication. So if you remember, we did discuss about the differences between Redis and Memcached, and that is one of the difference. So yeah, there is a table on the Amazon Elastic Cache site, which clearly shows the differences between Redis and Memcached. We did cover that in our previous session, so please go through that in detail. This is one of the concepts that you will be tested on in the exam. Moving on to the next question. Let's see the score first. Okay, so 3 of you got it right, and they're on the scoreboard, which is good. Now let's move on to the second question. Those who are joining now, please feel to join the Kahoot. The game pin is displayed on the screen towards the bottom right, or I have pasted it on the group right now. The game pin is 3514570. So we are having a recap quiz on databases, which we have covered in the last session. Yeah, 2 of you got it right. It is Amazon Aurora, and we need to use multi-AZ replicas and restore snapshots using Amazon RDS test database. Why it is so? Why it is not RDS for SQL Server, and why Amazon Aurora? So yeah, the question itself has the details. The question says the company wants to explore alternate databases options and migrate database engines if needed. And as Aurora is much more scalable, uh, it's better to migrate it to Aurora, and it is a SQL compatible. In terms, it is also a relational database, so you can migrate from SQL Server to Aurora. And secondly, if you see the last sentence of the question, it says that recommend as a replacement database. So yes, replacement database would be Aurora. And between the first two, it's always better to restore from a snapshot rather than using a MySQL dump. Anyways, MySQL dump would be mainly for MySQL database and not for SQL server. And that is why option B is the right answer. So moving on to the next question, let's see the quickly dashboard. Okay, so we do have a shuffle in there, and Prasad Anand leading with Shitanshu with the second, and Muthu got it right, so he's on the leaderboard. So let's move on to the next question. Which of the statement is false for DynamoDB? So there is one of the sentence which is not correct for DynamoDB. We need to identify that sentence. Yep, three of you got it right, which is B. By default, it is single availability zone. No, by default, a DynamoDB table is spread across three availability zones. So statement B is false. Statement A, data reads are either eventually consistent or strongly consistent. Yes, you need to specify whether you want an eventually consistent read or a strongly consistent read. And this is a concept that we did discuss in the last session. That because of the nature of the NoSQL, the data is replicated across multiple nodes. So when the data is written onto one node, the data is replicated to the other nodes, and there is a lag in between. And in case if you want the data to be consistent at the moment it is written, then it has to be strongly consistent. Or if you can wait for a second, then it is eventually consistent. It means that you might read a stale data, but when you read it again, it will eventually become consistent. For the option C, I see a few of the people have given that as a false statement. No, that is a correct statement. So as we discussed, from DynamoDB perspective, there is a partition key, which is kind of a primary key, and then there's a sort key, which is kind of a local key. So the overall primary key is based off two things: partition key and a sort key. And there are two types of indexes that we can add. One is local secondary index and global secondary index. In local secondary index, it can be added only at the time of creation of database, which is the option D, which is correct. And we need to specify only the sort key, because the partition key would be continuing to be the same, and only the sort key is required to be adding a new local secondary index. But when it comes to global secondary index, you need to provide both partition key and the sort key, and it can be added anytime after, either at the time of database creation or anytime after the database creation. It can be added later on also. So option A, D, C, and D All are correct statements. Only option B is a wrong statement because of DynamoDB is by default spread across 3 availability zones. So let us see if we have any change in the scoreboard. Okay, Prasad still leading, Sushil is second, and third is Shitanshu. Moving on to the next question. 10 seconds left. Okay, that's really good. Almost all of you got the right answer, though it took some time for probably answering, but seems almost all of you got the right. So yes, as it says, because uh, of the reports that need to be generated and that is causing the delay, we can always use a read replica. And Amazon Aurora is MySQL compatible. So if you have a MySQL database, you can always use Amazon Aurora. The tricky part here is using the application reader endpoint for reports. So it's not like a multi-AZ in case when your primary goes down, automatically the DNS is set to the standby. Here, the reader has a specific endpoint as your primary, and the application parts that needs to be reading from the reader, you need to configure the reader endpoint for that. So option C is the correct answer, and I am glad everyone did it correctly. There's a slight change in leaderboard, but everyone holding their position strong, the top three specifically. So good. We'll move on to the next question. In 20 seconds. None of you got it right. So this is very specific. Give me just 1 second. I need to Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So this is a very specific way of doing how do we actually encrypt a database. So option C is the correct way to do it. In fact, that you need to take a snapshot of RDS instance, and then we need to create an encrypted copy of the snapshot, and then we need to restore with the encrypted snapshot, and that's how you can like encrypt RDS instance which is has not been encrypted from the very beginning. Yeah, this requires a deep knowledge of understanding how it is done. So I would suggest that do a hands-on lab of this. This should be present in the quick lab links that I have shared in my initial session. How to encrypt a snapshot, or you'll be able to find the steps of doing it in the RDS user guide. So, but do it on your own so that you do understand the process of how it is done. The C is the right answer. So I don't see anyone, any changes in the leaderboard here. It will be same, I believe. We'll move on to the next question. Anyone who is joining now, please feel free to join the quiz. We have 5 questions still going on. So, and the game pin is 3514570. I've pasted it on the chime link, and you can also see it in the bottom right of the screen. 5 seconds left. Yep, the correct answer for these question is option C and option D. Mainly because both are multi-AZ. If you see in the question, third sentence, it says the database should be highly available and fault tolerant. So for highly available, you need to have a multi-AZ. Because the question talks about a relational database, the option cannot be A, because Amazon DynamoDB is a NoSQL database, not a relational database. And option cannot be B because it does not mention that how Amazon RDS for MySQL is being used, whether it is a multi-AZ enabled or not. Option C and D does specifically say that multi-AZ is enabled, and that's what is required for the database to be highly available and fault tolerant. So moving on to the next question, the scoreboard changes. Tanshu leading now. And let's go for this question number 7. Which of the following statement is true for RDS? So one of the statement is correct and rest all the statements are wrong. So identify the correct statement. 5 seconds left. So the correct answer is B. Automated backups are by default enabled, and you disable them explicitly in case if you don't want automated backups. I see it's a mixed distribution from the answers that we have got. So let's go one by one. So option A, RDS is currently available for Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, Cassandra, and MariaDB. So RDS is relational database service from AWS. Cassandra is a NoSQL database, and RDS is not available for Cassandra. RDS is available for Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, MariaDB, and PostgreSQL. And then we have Aurora. B, as we discussed, is the correct answer because automated backups are by default enabled. Option C. So for the underlying storage of RDS instance, it can either be a standard storage or a provisioned IOPS. So provisioned IOPS is mainly for a higher throughput in terms of IO, and that is required mainly for production workloads. So in case if you have a high traffic for OLTP transactions, then that is when you will be using provisioned IOPS. From the pricing perspective, it is more costlier than the standard storage. For test database, you can use standard database or standard storage for the database. Option D, maximum retention period. We discussed this last week, and we have seen this in the AWS management console. Automated backups can be configured from 1 day to 35 days. So maximum retention period is 35 days, and the minimum is 1 day unless it is disabled. If you, as we have seen in the lab last week, if you go to the AWS Management Console and try to create a RDS database on your own, there will be an option for you to configure the automated backups, which is enabled by default. You'll see that the checkbox is checked by default, and the drop down would be there, in which the by default it is 7 days, which is set, which can be changed from 1 day to 35 days. So this is where the hands-on will really help you guys to uh, get these nitty-gritty of concepts of RDS and DynamoDB, understand them. Once you'll see them visually while doing the labs on your own, you will remember them. Let's see if this changes the scoreboard. Yeah, there's a bit of shuffling in the scoreboard. Prasad Anand going to the top. Let's move on to the next question. And we have 3 more questions left. Thirty seconds left. Okay, so again, seems none of you got it correct. Surprisingly, all other 3 options selected apart from the correct one. So here it talks about DynamoDB. It talks about how we can increase the performance of a DynamoDB specifically to the reads. So when it comes to RDS, so understand the concepts here. When it comes to RDS, we do have a read replica through which uh, we can increase the read performance. And then to increase the read performance of RDS, what else we can do is use caching service like Elastic Cache for Redis or Elastic Cache for Memcache based on the scenario. But for DynamoDB, and again we did discuss about this very briefly during our last session. For DynamoDB, we have something in built feature which is DynamoDB Accelerator, which is more of a cache for DynamoDB. It is a write-through cache for DynamoDB, and you can enable it with some extra cost. And then you can point your application to the DynamoDB accelerator, which is known as DAX endpoint. And then this will act as a cache for DynamoDB, which will increase your read performance. If you see the option number B, DynamoDB read replicas, there is no concept of read replicas for DynamoDB. The concept of read replicas is mainly for RDS, Relational Database Service. Option C, double the number of read capacity units for new messages table in DynamoDB. It doesn't happen like that. When you increase the read capacity, it is not for new message or the old message. It is overall the read capacity is being increased and you'll be charged for based on the read capacity. And as I said, Elastic Cache for Redis Cache is an option. It's not that it cannot be an option, but DynamoDB Accelerator is a much better option for DynamoDB because it has been specifically designed for DynamoDB. Okay, I don't expect any change in the scoreboard. Moving on to the second last question. Thirty seconds left. Okay, so few of you got it right. Correct option is B. It is Amazon DynamoDB with on-demand enabled. So let's look at the question and see how we can eliminate the answers here to arrive at the right answer. The question says the developer is unsure of the current database schema. And if a developer is unsure of current database schema, it has to be a NoSQL database. Unless the database schema is defined, it cannot be a relational database. So that removes Amazon Aurora as an option. So answer A and D is not the correct. It has to be either B or C. Then it says that it should be automatically scaling read and write capacity. So as we know in DynamoDB, we do have read capacity and write capacity units, and it should be automatically scaled. So whenever there is a automatically scaled, it has to be on demand. So when it is on demand, that is when we'll be able to use a automatic scaling. So there are two ways to define read capacity and write capacity. Either provision it. In case if you know the load, you can provision it that you need 10 read capacity units and 5 write capacity units or so on and so forth. But in case if you're not sure of the load, then you can always make it on demand, and then behind the scenes it will be automatically scaled. That obviously comes with a higher cost, but it comes with the flexibility. DynamoDB streams, option C, is mainly used in case for every change of that is happening on the DynamoDB, you want to trigger some action, or you want to have a time ordered sequence of the changes that has been done on DynamoDB. That's when DynamoDB streams are used. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Before that, let's look at the scoreboard. So Prasad Anand leading, Sushil second, third Shitanshu, Muthu fourth, and Ashutosh is at fifth position. So let's look at the final question. Twenty seconds left. Okay, three of you got it right. The answer is D, Amazon Aurora Global Database. I'm glad no one has given answer B as an option. That's because DynamoDB is not a relational database. So relational data, it has to be either Aurora or RDS. But having said that, it is a multi-region disaster recovery. And because it's a multi-region disaster recovery, it has to have a global. It means that there should be a database writes happening on on database which is like at a multi-region, because here the RTO and RPO are really less. It's more like you are having almost a hot standby, or I would say a multi-site application, because recovery point is 1 second and recovery time is 1 minute. So you're having a multi-site region for a like in multiple regions. And so if RDS needs to be done to another region, we'll have to have the snapshot ready, and then we'll have to promote it, right? So here the best option is having a global database, which is possible only in two of them. That is Amazon DB Global Tables or Amazon Aurora Global Database. So the option for this is answer for this is option D, Amazon Aurora Global Database. Okay. With that, we come to the end of the question, and let's look at the podium. So you have Siddhanshu at the third place, Sushil at the sixth place, and first is Prasad Anand. So I do understand these are like quite difficult. If you see, overall it's a 70% passing mark on the like solution architect associate certification. The level would be a bit different from what you have seen in the cloud practitioner. This would require more hands-on, more reading through the FAQs and the user guides. With that, let's take a quick 5 minutes break, and then we'll start with today's sessions. We'll cover the networking side of it today. We'll first go through our Excel to see what all we can cover for networking, and we'll dive deep into Route 53 for sure today.